Hello, welcome back to the Rams Review podcast after yet another win for Derby County. Jack here alongside Nigel, and we have some more very positive discussion for you tonight. Nigel, how are you?
I'm pleasantly surprised, considering where we were 4 games ago, and I think we were all accepting that relegation was a fate that we had to get used to. Here we are now, out of the bottom three, and can't quite believe it. Job not done yet, but it's looking a hell of a lot easier than it was 4 games ago.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to reel off a couple of very basic numbers that I posted earlier. I put these in my report last night. I was talking to a couple of mates and I just said, tweet it. Uh, so Derby have more wins in the last 4 games, having won all four, than they did in the previous 24 games in the league, and have scored 9 goals in the last 4 games, which is more than they'd scored in their previous 15. That tells
Yeah, I
you
mean,
everything, doesn't it?
I think that sums it up, doesn't it? And there's all manner of reasons for that. I think John Eustace is the obvious one. We've had a bit more luck with injuries. Perhaps you can say last night a bit more luck with refereeing decisions going our way as well. Last night, if we're being brutally honest. But overall, it just looked like that big word of momentum. You get one win, and funnily enough, then another one follows. The players start to believe in themselves a bit more, and as I've seen in some of the commentaries from yesterday, it takes a lot to win 4 games in a row in this division, whether you're top or bottom of it, and to win four from the position we were in. All credit to everybody involved in that, be it players, the coaching staff, and the fans as well for staying behind the team. It'd be very easy, for very few people to have gone in the last few weeks and thought, you know what, after everything we've seen, why bother going out on a cold Tuesday, Wednesday night, etc., etc. But we continue to get behind the Rams. We continue to follow them on the road, and it's runs like this that make those 12 games without a win, seem worth it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it was, one of those games that had a really low key start, which, as I wrote last night, is diplomatic reporter speech for it was a bit dull. Just kind of not much goal mouth action in that first half. But do you know what? Derby are doing what they need to do. It's effective, and actually, as much as it might not be kind of prime Barcelona tiki taka, we are seeing goals which we were not seeing before, as that stat alluded to. But you kind of look back through that first half, and it started with a big blow just a couple of minutes in, with a bit of bad luck again with injuries.
Yeah, it was a strange one, really, wasn't it? It was almost as if, if Nyambi had passed the ball as he meant to do back to Zetterstrom, then probably wouldn't have got the injury. And we wouldn't have had the immediate worry that we had 2 minutes in. Fortunately, the bad touch by the Preston forward meant that we were able to get back and prevent the goal. But yes, yeah, Nyambi 2 minutes into coming back. A surprising decision for me to actually see him start, given that Wilson had started the last three that we'd won. But yeah, within 2 minutes we were back to that 11. But yeah, just seems a shame that, and an irony that after 2 and a bit weeks to get players back on the grass again, here we are 2 minutes in, and we've lost another one for a yet to be determined period of time.
Yeah, back on the grass. That phrase that we thought we'd heard the last of when Paul Warne was sacked. It's gloriously ambiguous, isn't it, as to how fit players really are. But yeah, I think it was a little bit of a blow, as you say, unfortunate given the type of pass. But that first half kind of went by. Preston in control of the ball, but a lot of it in their own half. A lack of real threat. The one thing I would say throughout the game, the one real bright spot for them was Kane Kessler-Hayden, um, the Villaloni, who obviously couldn't play in the FA Cup on Saturday, going to his parent club. And I'd say with him, he really pinned that Derby defence back in the early stages. Most dribbles uh, of any player on the pitch, drew the most fouls of any player on the pitch, everywhere down both sides. He was a threat. Legs and drifting wide, and Keane dropping in to facilitate that. But really, that, as I say, they couldn't get out Preston a lot of the time into that kind of final third and really threaten. And then you get to the start of the second half. Whatever John Eustace said at half time must have worked like a charm. And 3 minutes in, it's Craig Forsyth again with his second in 4 games from the left of the back three.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to know what was going through Craig Forsyth's mind because it's not an obvious one that you see your centre half receiving the ball there back to goal, and his first thought is to run 4 or 5 yards across the goal and turn and shoot. When there are players like Harrison Armstrong stood on the edge of the box screaming for it to be laid back, having seen his finish at Plymouth, you're thinking, lay it off to him, lay it off to him, lay it off to him. But in fairness to Craig Forsyth, he's rolled back the years to his attacking days, turned the defender, and the classic thing. He's not gone for power; he's gone for placement, and that was what ultimately beat the partially sighted Swansea, partially unsighted Swansea goalkeeper. Swansea, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Preston goalkeeper, and put us in the lead. And yeah, I think like you say, the only real shot that Zetterstrom had to save in the first half was from that mistake from Nyambi early on. It wasn't that, you'd been surprised if he didn't make the save from that. And for all the possession that they then had, didn't really threaten the goal. And following up one with two quite quickly has been a habit that we've got into just lately. And yes, followed that up again last night.
Yeah, and it was, of course, Jerry Yates with, I think, a deserved goal given his hard work off the ball in recent games. I think John Eustace alluded to that to Rams TV, I believe it was last night. That's his first goal from open play since the 4-2 defeat at Hillsborough on New Year's Day, actually. And it was another one of those games where he didn't have many touches of the ball, the least of any outfield player to start, but he got the most touches of any Derby player in the box. He got the ball in the key place at the right time and he delivered. And I think that is kind of epitomizing him and the way he's playing in possession. He's not there for that really kind of and build up play now. Whereas start of the season he was maybe dropping in, creating chances a bit more in those first few games where he did so well. Now he's that kind of final touch, the focal point, and really what he's doing is just pressing the opposition into mistakes. I think, but yeah, I mean, second goal loops over the keeper, and Derby are away two in what 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think what the noticeable difference is between this team and that of Paul Warne is we actually get the ball in the box. And it's not necessarily pretty about how we get it in there. It's just get it in the box. Having seen the I won't call them long throws because they're not quite the medium throws that we have now, it causes trouble for defenses. And we've seen it for defenses that have looked pretty solid. If you just keep getting the ball in the box, we've got some big fellas in there who can win the headers. And when the ball drops with people like Jerry Yates and Marcus Harness around, they have the potential to pick up those loose balls and score goals. It's been effective for us in the last four games that we've seen. And it surprises me for somebody like Warne, where he is famed for set pieces and causing chaos in the box, that we didn't get the ball in the box. The more often you have the ball in the opposition box, the more likely you are to score. That just makes sense in a simple footballing logic, and that seems to be the case. Yates was the right man in the right position yesterday. Harness has been in recent games, and all of a sudden it feels like there are goals to come from across the front line, whereas previously it's been where on earth are the goals going to come from at all?
Yeah, do you know what's interesting on that front is with having more balls into the box, Yates, as I say, still maybe not being as involved in that play in terms of being on the ball. I wonder whether that would change if someone like Salverson was fit and having that taller player. Because if you look back on those goals last night, who gets the knockdown on Callum Elder's crosses, gets both assists? It's Nat Phillips, who is a big aerial threat in both boxes, has actually remarkable numbers in that respect as well to back that off in terms of that threat in the opposition box for a centre back. And I mean, for him, really, clean sheet, solid defensive performance, two assists. The one kind of thing that went against him, or should have done really potentially, is that penalty shout. But a really solid night for him, and I have seen a few calls for him to be signed this summer from fans today.
Yeah, I think all fans would probably be for that. I guess the question is, he's from what I hear on his wages at Liverpool, I don't think he's going to be able to match that. The question is how much is he willing to give up on his wages? Who else can offer him more? Does he want to come to a club that he now knows and the players and the manager and the opportunity? for a guy of his age, he's got to weigh all that up and decide. I'm sure he's a player who won't be short of offers from the Championship next season. Will he get an offer from a lesser, and they're all going to be lesser than Liverpool looks like in the Premier League next season? Maybe. I don't, if you were to compare his second half of the season versus Aaron Cashin's first half of the season, and say that Aaron Cashin made his debut in the Premier League yesterday, could you see a situation where Nat Phillips is playing Premier League football next season? I certainly could. I'd love to keep him at Derby. I just wonder if, perhaps his performances at Derby have been too good for us to hold on to him. But I think, that the one again, another, we've said there have been lots of factors, but I think, the other factors that we are seeing that are helping now are the performances that we've seen from those players we've got on loan from the Premier League. Marcus Harness has found a position now that suits him. Perhaps he wasn't being played in that position enough under Paul Warne. More central, having more of a play. A flick yesterday that would have been an outrageous goal had it gone in.
Yeah.
But the way he's been playing, you're almost expecting it to come inside, the far netting from there. But the other one is Harrison Armstrong, again, who, it'd be interesting to see whether Everton want him in their first team squad next year, or whether they're willing to let him back on loan to the Championship. But, another one in the line of Everton central midfielders who've been brilliant for Derby County on loan, and it would be great if we could get him for another season. But again, I think there will be competition for that. Hopefully, it's in our favour that he's enjoying his time at Derby. He's playing in the way that Everton want him to play. But I guess there must be a risk that Everton want him back in their first team squad and his career to progress that way as well.
Yeah, see, on that front, I think if Derby stay up and Everton want him to have another loan move, there's a decent chance because with someone like him, it's about development, playing the right style of football. This is something. Uh, this is a point. This isn't just me name dropping, but this is something that Nigel Clough spoke about when he came into uni yesterday as part of the football journalism course. We had Nigel Clough come in with a couple of players, and he was talking about the young players that he's got and how important it is for those players to be at clubs playing the right way, getting games in the right style of football to develop. And I wonder whether now that's in Derby's favour. If Armstrong is getting games and developing in the way they want him to develop, why risk it? Why risk him going to someone who's maybe going to push for the playoffs next season and then he doesn't play, or they change up the way they're playing and it's not really suitable for his development? I think in these situations when it's only been kind of half a season on loan, where he maybe took a couple of weeks to get going as well, maybe a full season under his belt would be a valuable thing for his development.
Yeah, I guess the only thing from Derby's point of view might be that it might be another one of these that we have to see who Everton bring in and out before we can secure the loan. So we may end up paying the first month or so of the season, hoping that they don't lose a central midfielder. That means all of a sudden he's on their bench and we can't have him at the end of September. We have to, as we know far too well, chase around on September the 30th trying to find a replacement for what we thought we got sewn up. But yeah, look, again, this sort of run, the way the manager's playing, the way the manager's getting results, and the way he's getting performances out of players can only help in the recruitment that we're going to need to have in the summer because of the number of players who are out of contract. Doesn't mean they all have to leave, but I think some we can all agree on probably will need to be moved on. So there's going to need to be some amount of recruitment in the summer. But hopefully now it can be recruitment for the Championship rather than for League One.
I think what's striking, if I'm just kind of zooming out of the conversation here, is we're talking really hopefully about these players and what they could do for Derby in the Championship again, which, what, a month ago, 7 points adrift was completely unthinkable. I mean, I think that's full credit to John Eustace. It's been, I said it last night, it's been transformational, really. It looks a different side to that of a month ago, a different club in terms of atmosphere. And I think the mentality that has shifted, that I know I've alluded to previously on previous podcasts, is massive. Is to come back off what 2.5 weeks without a game and continue that winning run, keep that momentum, is massive going into what 7 games in a month. A month today, as we record
I
this at
think
what
one of
20
the
past
things,
6, we'll know.
yeah, I think one of the things that again struck me yesterday and has done in these previous games now is how solid we look defensively. You mentioned Nat Phillips there. Matt Clark has got back. Once he's got himself fully fit, he's been the rock that he was at Derby before. Craig Forsyth, admittedly, I've worried when I've seen him at left fullback and left wing back as he get exposed. On that left side of a back three, his pace is less exposed, and
Yeah,
therefore he can do what he's good at, which is heading dirty stuff to do the other stuff with, and moving on from there. We look very solid. The wing backs are covering back well. The midfielders now, it almost doesn't feel like we're playing with defensive midfielders and attacking midfielders. We're playing with what I would just call midfielders, people who can tackle, who can win the ball, who can pass the ball, who can get forward into the box and score goals. It feels a very fluid and at time perhaps playing the most attacking of the three midfielders, which you wouldn't necessarily associate with him. But with him, Tomo, and Harrison Armstrong, you've got three very fit players who can get from box to box and contribute at both ends of the pitch. And I always think, you look back over time, actually the fans' favourites at Derby have often been centre halves rather than centre forwards. Going back to the times of McFarland and all the others in between, the Stimacks, the Mark Wrights, all those sorts of people in between. Derby fans really do like a good, solid central defender who saves games for you, for all the forwards that we've had in the time. And it just feels like now we've got that solid back three. Touch wood, they can all stay fit to the end of the season. And I think that's giving us the platform to go forward and score goals from.
yeah, it's a disciplined, organized structure as a base, and I think that as you point out is crucial to have that foundation. I mean, what's the old quote about defense winning you titles? And Derby aren't going to win a title this season, but it's that same idea as a foundation of any run. You've got to have that. And I think what's really interesting when I was doing some research earlier is when you then look at the wing backs and we talk about them and the work rate and getting back. Meanwhile, Callum Elder, whilst doing that, obviously soldiered on after that early knock last night. But over the last 3 games, he has had the most touches in the attacking third for Derby. So he is being the most involved in that final third of any Derby player, which, considering the work rate and how solid they then look at the back as well, that doesn't happen. Your wing back doesn't have that license if the back three and the midfield aren't doing as well as they are, being as secure as they are as well. And I think it just feels to me like everybody's putting in a real shift every week. And if we can keep that until the end of the season, I think this Derby team will get over the line, which, feels bold to say still because of how things have gone. And if it doesn't happen, feel free to clip that up. And I am completely wrong. But I think the belief is back. And I mean, I'll tell you how much the belief is back. I've just slipped into referring to Derby as we, which I try not to do.
It's the keeping it going is an interesting phrase to use there. I think there was a little bit of nervousness yesterday around 75, 80 minutes when Preston had a bit more pressure and obviously, like you say, the penalty shout against Nat Phillips. But largely we looked comfortable seeing the game out yesterday, which we haven't always done this season. There was a stat that on Sky they mentioned, which I was surprised about even to this extent, but was that if you took the scores of games half an hour into them this season, Derby are a top six side. I hadn't quite seen it to that extent, but it just shows how we weren't seeing games out. I've been conscious that our bench hasn't helped us see games out, and that's where we've lost games at crucial times. But I wasn't really aware that it was to that extent. But I don't know what John Eustace has done with them, but it feels like almost in making fewer substitutions, we're seeing games out better.
Yeah, I think it maybe comes back to keeping that solidity, that consistency, and those players building that understanding of how each other play, where they're going to be on the pitch. I mean, you see it time and time again, where, especially with 5 substitutions being available nowadays, a couple of defenders get changed when you are holding on to a lead, and it completely disrupts the setup of that back line. I mean, the most stark one that comes to mind for me is it was a random friendly Scotland played against Finland before the Euros last summer. They were cruising. Steve Clarke changes half the back line, and they go and just fall apart completely and lose to Finland. Nice way to you know to leave for Germany for a first major tournament overseas in 26 years. But I do think that is maybe part of it, kind of undoing some of that uh, constant turnover that you see with the high number of substitutions now. We're often seeing what one or two made before stoppage time as well, and then they're just used to kind of kill the clock, as it were. So I do wonder whether that's a strategic thing, but also the fitness that is there now. These players are not being gassed out at the end of every game. We're not hearing that. They're looking fairly solid. I wonder what's changed there because they're still playing a lot of the time without the ball.
Yeah, I wonder if the gassed out limit, if we can call it that, has been pushed higher. It feels like the almost sort of mandated, and we heard it from Eustace in one of his earlier wins, right? That you know, being told that a player can only play 60 minutes when actually he then played 89 or 90 minutes, we're going through that. It's almost like, go through the pain barrier, no pain, no gain. And that players, perhaps are playing more than in theory the medical team are saying they can do. It just feels like that's it. And funnily enough, when you're winning, players want to play 90 minutes. When you're losing 1-0 every week, they're more than happy to come after 60 minutes and rest the final 30 minutes on the bench. But it feels like now, players want to play every minute of the game. They want to be there when the final whistle blows. And like you say, they just feel like they understand each other's movements and where everybody fits into the jigsaw, where perhaps under Warne it just felt like they didn't entirely know their own roles, let alone those of those around them. Zetterstrom again, it makes me laugh. His interviews after games should embarrass those for whom English is their natural language, doing post-match interviews. But he was very quick to point out that it makes his job a hell of a lot easier with the defense he's got in front of him, playing with a stable back three in front of him. He knows when he can come for the ball. They know when he's going to come for the ball. And at times last night, when we'd been under a bit of pressure, a ball came into the box, they could be confident he was going to come, claim, and calmly collect the ball 6, 8, 10 yards from the goal, relieve the pressure. They could move up the pitch and go again. And he did that time and time again. From what you would expect from a good championship goalkeeper that, barring the odd mistake, I think he has been over the season.
I would agree there. I think the major criticism with him has probably been that distribution. If he sorts that out, I wouldn't be surprised to see clubs really come sniffing. So I know Wolves were interested in him when he was at Djurgården still in Sweden. But yeah, that'll certainly be an interesting one. But as you say, he's certainly looked a very solid keeper, especially in this run of form. Because again, I think confidence breeds confidence at the end of the day. And now for Derby, it's about taking that to South Wales on Saturday. So Swansea, of course, Alan Sheehan given the head coach job until the end of the season last week, following a run of 7 points from 5 games. And then they went and drew 2-2 at Leeds. So a bit of a run for the Swans since Luke Williams was dismissed. And I think if you look back to that reverse fixture though, Derby were the better side that night. That was the game in which Swansea got the two early goals inside what 14 minutes, and then Derby only found the net from the spot, despite amassing what was their highest XG total and still is since December 2020. That was the number of chances. I mean, XG imperfect metric, granted, but the sheer number. I mean, it was 3.6 or something, and they got one goal from it, and that was a penalty, which is what 0.77 ish. So you take that out, Derby should have had just shy of 3 goals on XG and failed to find the back of the net. But I think the way they responded that night to come back into that game was impressive, even though they couldn't find an equaliser. Now this is a team that has that confidence, who you would hope won't switch off in those early stages in the same way.
Yeah,
And
that
then
was within that run of games where we were playing well for 75, 80, 85 minutes, but it was
Yeah,
that 5, 10, 15 minutes that was killing us. Cardiff away was another example where we conceded two goals in a short space of time from two errors, cost of the game. Swansea,
yeah.
another one. It's all good having XG above three, but when you concede two in the first 15 minutes, a side is always going to allow you, particularly away from home, to come onto them that bit more. And that was a classic example of that night. But yeah, like you say, I don't think we can go to South Wales with any great fears of who we're coming up against, particularly how well we've played in the last four, and like you say, confidence breeds confidence. The next three games are all three interesting games, two that really matter against sides that are in and amongst us, and then a very interesting one against Burnley, a side who don't concede that many, but don't score that many either, which is why they're not quite hitting the straps to confirm that top two place that they're battling with the two Yorkshire sides on. But yeah, it'd be an interesting one to measure where we are that night after we did get, what was a battling point up at Turf Moor in the season as well.
And I think the other thing with that game, with the way Burnley play, as you say, they don't concede many. They also don't score many. So for Derby, if they can nick something, I mean, I've got a mate who's a Burnley fan, and he says to me regularly he struggles to remember the last time he saw more than two goals in a game at Burnley. And I think that becomes a really interesting proposition because if Derby can nick something, whether it's luck or skill early on, and then defend as valiantly as they have done in recent weeks, it's the Burnley side who, for all their defensive strength, are relatively toothless for a side that are automatic promotion contenders. Not relative to the rest of the league necessarily, but you'd expect the side up there to have more threat. Then it certainly becomes an intriguing battle. So yeah, I think really what Derby on now? 41 points, 7 games to go. 50 points is that magic number, supposedly, in this league. Many people seem to think that number might be slightly lower this season as well. I mean, 7 games. What do you reckon Derby can get from this next two, and what do you think they need overall, Nigel?
I mean, I'm looking at the next three because I'm going to include Portsmouth in that because I think that's, a key game as well, given where they are. And the fact, I think, almost looking at the table now, Preston, on the evidence of last night, are probably still within the reaches of the bottom three, I would say, from here. Um, Look, I think well, certainly two of the three are winnable. I think the two away games are very winnable given what we've got. Burnley, yeah, may or may not, but I think we're capable of getting a point from all three. And if we could, if we come out of this, sort of next weekend, the 7 game, so the 8 days of football with at least 3 points from it, I think that puts us on 44 points, uh, four four games to go. If my maths is right there,
Yeah,
and to get to that 50 point from there, you need 6 points, which is two wins. Well, given who we've got left to play after that as well, especially where we've been. But I think that comes out. If we can get a win and a draw out of those, all the better. And if there's a lot of ifs, and we were we were laughing at how an if we were going to get one win, let alone two wins. But now four come along, you get boldly on your predictions. You start thinking, well, if we can win five and six in a row, it could be all done and dusted before we get to those cliched 6 pointers that there are lining up towards the end of the season, particularly that Stoke one on the final day.
absolutely. I mean, I think when we got to the halfway point and Derby had what 27 points, given the kind of low numbers of points we saw at that point, I remember saying in WhatsApp we've got podcast, I said, you know, 50 points is generally the magic number. 47-ish could maybe squeak it based on how low some of those points totals were then. Now I think it will be closer to 50. I think 2 wins will be you'd be lucky to do it with only 2 more wins, but certainly get that third, get to 50, maybe even 2 wins and a draw might be enough. But this is, as they said on Sky last night, this is the point in the season where those teams at the bottom start to pick up points more easily than those teams that are in kind of mid-table no man's land with very little to play for. And that's where things will get really interesting for Derby with these 6 pointers to come, which means that Preston last night, who had relatively little to play for, was significant in that respect. Swansea could get sucked in, and that's where they're going to be desperate to build on a decent spell under Alan Sheehan. But yeah, we'll bring you all of that next week, of course, and hopefully the run can continue. Anything more to add, Nigel, before we round this off?
No, I think that's good. I think you're right there about the mid-table sides. This is the point at which teams become mid-table sides with nothing to play for. I think if you look at the table now, the top, there's still plenty of competition for the playoffs. I think from Coventry, the top four are well away. Then you look at Coventry down to Bristol City. That's probably looking like the four that are going to compete from there. And then you sort of go from Watford to Millwall at the moment. So that's sort of five teams I would say realistically are you know having to consider whether they've got any hopes of reaching the playoffs, and probably think Millwall on 51 points now are safe. But as I say, Preston now only 7 points clear with 7 points to go, 7 games to go. They're not yet safe. They probably need one more. But then everybody else is still in the mix of relegation. So, week by week now, you start to tick one team off that hasn't got anything to play for. But yeah, yes, these next results are crucial. And actually, in the next 3 days, it's possible. I really hope we sit here in 10 days' time and say this, but that we could have found ourselves clear 50 points and sitting safe going into those points. The less those 6 pointers are 6 pointers, if that makes sense, the better.
Absolutely. Nigel, thank you very much for joining me for this chat. And I think all that we need to say to round this off is up the rounds.